Excellent. The meeting is being recorded. So let's get started right after I get Blair's message. Yeah, I agree, Blair. I really enjoy the webinars and the opportunities to connect with people relative to the issues that we've been addressing. For me, it's all about supporting our efforts and opportunities to coach recovery as well as we can. And what we're going to be talking about today is addressing stigma and removing barriers to access to recovery and care resources. Have you all had experience in thinking about, impacting, addressing stigma in your work? And as you come into this webinar, before I introduce our agenda, what do you come looking for? What would be helpful for us to talk about and to extend a conversation that matters around these issues? What would be helpful for you to do today? Okay. I like that concept, Blair, because as I think about, I use the word addressing stigma. I like overcoming stigma. I'm not so sure if we're going to be able to remove it entirely. Also finding other words for stigma. Any thoughts on that, Phil? That's interesting as we move along. Stacy, you say families of people in recovery using label. Oh my goodness, yes. To identify family members. Well, I think we'll certainly touch upon that as well. Well, let's look at what and that's helpful information, folks, and clearly let's have conversations relative to getting your needs met, but also introducing the pieces and the topics that you came to look for. With a smaller group, I'm looking for more interaction. For me, this is learning, doing, and teaching. I want to learn what you've learned and what you know as we move through this. The agenda that we've developed is, over the next hour, we'll identify barriers to access to recovery care resources. We'll describe stigma and its impact on access to recovery and some of the words we might use in place of the word stigma. We'll describe tools and strategies that can be used to address stigma, that practical application. For me, any training has to be learning, doing, and teaching. The ability to do and to practice it and walking away from this information, I think, is always critical. And finally, we're going to identify attitudes and practices that are supportive of removing barriers, impacting barriers, overcoming barriers to recovery care resources impacted by stigma and discrimination. Any questions relative to where we're going this morning? Or any comments relative to it? All righty. Okay. What do you see? And what do you think about what you see? What do you see? And what do you think about what you see? Opposites. Can you expand on the concept of opposites for me? Confusion. Yeah. Ooh. Talk to me more about confusion. Talk to me more about opposites. I like those two words. I've got my perception of what they mean. Help me to know what you're saying. You're thinking. Opposites, confusion. What's the confusion? What are the opposites of the oppositions? The paradigm of recovery. Yeah. There are negative connotations and, yes, also very positive attributes. There's a very powerful spiritual term that I learned in my own process of recovery, and it's both andness. We're both beasts and angels. And I think Blair verbalizing the negative connotations as well as the positive attributes really becomes alive in my head with that perception. And where do the negative connotations come from relative to what also identify as positive attributes? What a challenge. If a person is experiencing this kind of conundrum, it may increase his or her confusion and ability to move forward. Correct. And I think this conundrum can be identified, when I think about stigma, if you remember back to Recovery Coach Academy, it's a mark of shame. And when you think about shame, not only confusion, but I become paralyzed. I struggle to feel valuable enough or good enough to even think about moving forward. So I think we're already beginning to uncover some of the challenges that stigma presents to us in our humble efforts to help other people move forward. Any other thoughts about the image? I think I enjoy the conversation. I like where you're helping me to see. There's a quote from the Constitutional Court Justice in South Africa that says, if we do not appreciate the nature and impact of stigma, none of our interventions can begin to be successful. What do you think? What do you say? What do you add to this concept? If we do not appreciate the nature and impact of stigma, none of our interventions can begin to be successful. I think the ability to begin to be successful tags on to Phil's comment, the ability to move forward. It's the essence of cultural competency. Yeah. Appreciating the nature of difference that many times stigma presents. Appreciating the ability to provide cultures that are competent enough to receive us all. I think the ability to impact, overcome, identify, and deal with stigma is clearly an opportunity to begin to develop cultures that are competent to embrace difference, because so many times difference is developed through stigma. It sounds like a basis for the idea of trauma-informed interaction. More on that, please, Blair. If we are cognizant of the pain and confusion caused by stigma and shame, we can be sensitive to our own words and actions and suggestions. Well stated. Thank you. That is such a powerful statement attached to what we see in the image. Why do we label? I think so much of the stigmas that are presented in our world is a result of labels. Labels that in our own actions can cause harm, can increase trauma, shame. Why do we label? What do you see in this image? What's the value of labeling? We've moved to a place where we place labels on people, places, and things, and especially in our humble efforts to help others. Why do we label? As humans, we strive to make sense of things, and the only thing we have is words. Well stated. In our honest effort to make sense of things, we only have words to describe people, places, things. We compartmentalize to simplify. Yeah, yeah. We compartmentalize, we group, we gather, we herd people into categories in order to simplify. I mean, look at what DMS3 does. It brings a lot of variety into a document that is making an effort to compartmentalize and simplify a very complex process, human beings acting out their lives. Not have to appreciate what strengths or uniqueness are inherent in the individual. Yeah, that's treating someone as a resource versus an object. And many times it is so much simpler to compartmentalize, to stereotype, because it makes our sculpt perspective. Ooh, nice word. Nice wording. A resource is harder to deal with. A resource is harder to help create. You know, when I treat people with dignity and respect, that's work. That's relationship building. That's a humble effort to understand who that person is versus assuming who they are and labeling who they are based upon, short or minimal, limited information. Respect is intensive. I like that word, intensive. Respect is intense. And the ability to give and receive respect, especially in my own experience, hasn't always been easy. Because the bottom line there is self-respect. And if I'm involved with someone who seems to have labeled me or stereotyped me, and I'm not strong enough, sculpted enough to get through that process whole, it is very difficult. It is very intensive. Okay. And on top of this, why do we label? And then why do we label ourselves as a result of these labels that come down? What's been your experience of why we label ourselves, given the nature of the labels that many times we don't want or don't believe? Welcome, Jance. Just caught that you slipped in. Welcome. When we figure out that we will no longer need recovery coach. When we figure that out, yeah, you're right. Because so much of recovery coaching is impacting environments. So much of recovery coaching is removing the barriers and the obstacles. And what greater barrier or obstacle to personal growth, a sense of well-being, but more importantly, a sense of importance if we're labeling people to belong to something other than self. I want to belong, but it was hard to belong because I didn't fit, and many times I didn't fit because of the label I wore. Good example, I was thinking about this morning. Many times the stigma and the labels come as a result of what could be a positive experience. Folks, you cannot know how strongly I was labeled as an African American male attending Yale University. What could have been a very positive and what was expected to be a very positive and strength-producing and well-respected enterprise, I was stigmatized by people in my community, people in my household as a result of being a Yale student. There were labels and expectations and stigmas. For example, there was an expectation. I couldn't get a date my freshman year at Yale because the women in New Haven thought that as a Yale student, I was a part of that ivory tower and all I was going to do was use them. There's a positive piece of who I was that was stigmatized as I was moving through that experience at Yale University that for me, years into recovery, still stuck. It was shaming. It gets better. And here I was making an effort, as you say, Stacy, to belong to something other than myself, but belonging to a Yale community wasn't necessarily well looked upon in the community I came from in New Haven. Imagine being considered a strong woman, well stated, or a gay person. Yeah, similar experiences, labels that hurt, sometimes unintentionally. It's not unlike the course that Jim Wolfing and I do called Racism of the Well-Intended. There could be well-intentions relative to people's verbalizations. However, we don't know how deeply and hurtfully those labels can be experienced. There's always a conflict among others of our kind, even among others of our kind. Yes. So much of it is about dealing with conflict, confusion, difference. Labels. Labels that we've seen. Labels that we've used. Just a few of the labels. But they're labels. They're talking about people. They're categorizing people. They're stigmatizing people. When you look at these particular labels, they do have a connotation that's not necessarily helpful or positive in our society. And the people who wear these labels and verbalize these labels also can tap into the negativity that the labels present, when reality is a person who is a person being in their lives. Stigma refers to an unfavorable attitude and beliefs directed towards someone or something. Socially marginalized people bear the heaviest burden of stigma and discrimination. I think that's the critical nature of what coaching recovery impacts. Socially marginalized. That social marginalization can be impacted by creating cultures that are competent enough to receive us all. And the ability to do that has to be the ability to impact stigma, discrimination, and the impact of those concepts and the shaming that those concepts produce. Stigma, another image. Labeling, producing stereotypes, producing a division, us versus them, losing social status, discrimination, and around and around and around, unless we can impact and address this vicious cycle. Any thoughts about this image? How are you experiencing this image? Does it make sense to you? Does it fit your own paradigm of looking at stigma? And think about that division, us versus them. That can also happen in care centers, treatment centers, recovery centers, where labels and stereotypes continue to be used. And it sets up an us versus them piece that we'll look at as we move forward. So the case for addressing stigma. Appreciate that stigma is a powerful social process that turns difference into inequity and disadvantage. Stigma maintains and upholds inequitable structures. It leads to social and economic exclusion. It fuels and can be used to justify violations of human rights, discriminatory practices and laws. It can intensify and sustain vulnerability of the people who are being stigmatized and shamed. And can impede access to health and other services. Think about this powerful social process that stigma offers and presents. And think about it in the context of what we do and what our role as recovery coaches are as advocates, as well as people who help remove barriers and blocks to care and recovery. Any thoughts about this case for addressing stigma? Does this make sense for you? Does this fit at some level your own thinking about these concepts that we're talking about? Stigma, labeling, shaming, discriminating, excluding. Makes me think back to my own childhood. I wore the label of being a disadvantaged child. It does sound much too accurate. I wore the label that was stigmatizing, of being a part of a group of people who are disadvantaged and underprivileged. I wore that label forever and ever. In fact, that was the entree into Yale for me because they wanted to get disadvantaged, underprivileged children an opportunity to get an education that they may not be able to get at a university such as Yale. And yet, in order to do that, there was a label that I internalized and I accepted in that process. And boy, did it follow me forever. I'm particularly appalled that stigma intensifies and sustains vulnerability. It's difficult enough to experience and expose my vulnerability. It can exist, certainly it can serve as an example of what we aspire not to be, rather than closed and judgmental, be open, thoughtful, and compassionate. That's so much the way to look at it. It is so much the way to look at it. It's how do we get these weaknesses in our world, in our society, and help them to become strengths that help us all. Yes, yes, yes. I love the fact that we're looking at the both ends of these issues and that we're looking at the strengths and what appear to be the weaknesses. And clearly, we have to look at this information and appreciate it, what it is and what it does, and work hard to be able to identify it as we're helping people to move through their processes of change and personal growth, recovery, and care. A case for addressing stigma. Social exclusion is a huge, often hidden or neglected problem for people with mental health and substance use problems, their families and friends, and for all of us. Social exclusion can be caused by stigma, low expectations, lack of resources, poor coordination, and addressing a piece that was offered up front about what would be valuable to learn in this training, the ability to help family to appreciate and become more informed about social exclusion and stigma so that they don't perpetuate the labels as well. What's a shower ministry, may I ask? And Blair is typing, appreciate the fact that, again, for me, becoming culturally competent suggests that, it is simple fix to a really big problem when one lacks personal sanitation resources. Wow. 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 What a reminder that those things do exist. What a reminder that not everyone lives in the world in a way that's healthy and comfortable and growth producing. We must pay attention. Wow, I like that. Thank you, Blair. Thank you. Social exclusion caused by stigma, low expectations, lack of resources, poor coordination, poor education, poor awareness, poor awareness and training. Concurrent problems or disorders, and I put the word disorders in quotation marks. I prefer the word problems. Any combination of mental health and substance abuse disorders. 40 to 60% of people who have mental health problems will also have substance use problems during their lifetime. These percentages are similar for people who seek help for their substance use. Examples are an anxiety problem and a drinking problem, schizophrenia and cannabis dependence, borderline personality disorder, heroin dependence, depression, and dependence on just to make the point that many times the problems in living are co-occurring. They happen together. They move along together. They feed each other in very negative ways. Yeah, I'm pretty sure. I mean, how are we to really know, Stacy? How are we really know? But they're too high, aren't they? They're just too high. I can remember someone saying to me, again, prior to treatment helping and working for me, that to be a successful African American male in the world, I had to be successfully schizophrenic. And that really impacted me. Even though I didn't really understand the word schizophrenic, I knew it was a mental health diagnosis. But clearly my mental health was shattered. My mental health was disordered as a result of living in the world. I'm understanding trauma to be something that is a problem. I'm understanding trauma to be something that needs to be addressed. I'm particularly understanding trauma that has aspects of limiting my ability to think and be mentally healthy. It's amazing. Trauma-informed, shame and trauma. I didn't appreciate how much trauma not only that I lived through, but that my mother lived through and that probably my grandparents lived through that was passed on to myself and my siblings as a result of not understanding the concept, but living in the midst of it. No doubt my mother was traumatized in 1946 and 48 living in Savannah, Georgia, and experiencing lynchings of young black males. And then to have sons that she was making an effort to bring into the world and move through the world had to have been a traumatic experience, as evidenced by the fact that the relationship that she had with substances. I personally feel that trauma and PTSD, yeah, no doubt, Stacy, no doubt, and very valuable work. Very valuable work. And do you also appreciate the stigma that becomes attached to those concepts in working with veterans who through no fault of their own have experienced what they've experienced, and we put labels on them and we put responses on those issues in their lives that impact their ability to get the care and the respect that they deserve and need. We so much end up treating like objects or recipients versus the true resources that they are. I'm loving the interaction, folks. Looking for a couple more comments coming through. Don't we, though? Don't we, though? Very powerful statement, Stacy. We treat the military as objects in general. Yeah, they are people who serve us. So how then do we help people develop a healthy armor that acknowledges what's inside or what has happened but no longer causes current pain? Time for healing, Blair, is the simple, complicated answer that I have. And interesting, when I think about heal, there was a rap song that was done back in the 70s and 80s when I was in the process of healing myself that I could really tap into. And heal, the acronym for heal was Human Education Against Lies. And that fits this concept of stigma, the lies that I experienced relative to the healing that I needed. This is a part of turning the stigma, pain, trauma into a strength. Hit the nail on the head. The relationship of support. I mean, both of those comments, folks, speak to me what recovery coaching impacts, focuses on, and is the clear paradigm switch that I've experienced in moving from a counselor, a clinician, or a therapist into a recovery coach. It is strength-based and focused, and it's a relationship of support. And in strength-based and focus and a relationship of support, how do we help people to experience their pain, heal through that pain, and move on beyond that pain? We certainly don't do it by the ongoing shaming that labels and stigmas that produce in a person's life. Gosh, I like what you guys are offering me. and offering us. Well done. See, my hope was that many of us have looked at stigmas and labels, but so much of this conversation takes us beyond what I clearly have not experienced. Non-judgment based upon support. Andres Ariane, in her fourfold way of living, she's a cultural anthropologist, and she speaks about the way of the creative problem solver, and we are helping people to co-create problem solutions. The way of the creative problem solver, as Andres Ariane speaks about it, is tell the truth without blame or judgment. Yes, you're right, Blair. You're right. How do we tell the truth without blame or judgment? How do we not allow those words that we see and hear and experience on a daily basis not to impact our thinking as we're sitting with someone who has been marginalized, labeled, stigmatized, discriminated against? Good to hear, Stacy. Good to hear. Very powerful resource, i.e. Androsari, in moving my life, in learning how to change my life, and live a life. Let's talk about the stigmas that are produced by our humble efforts to care and provide care. Negative attitudes towards clients with co-occurring disorders can arise for several reasons. They may include designation of responsibility, feelings of inadequacy, frustration, disappointment on the part of care providers when working with a client with complex needs and issues, perception of a poor prognosis based upon those same feelings of inadequacy, frustration, disappointment when working with clients complex. How else have you experienced care providers stigmatizing the people that they are challenged or offering care to? Multiple attendees are typing. Good folks. Plus, are there any questions or comments on this particular slide? Negative attitudes that we as caretakers firing clients that are not on their spectrum of care model. Whoosh! Yes. Blair offers a perspective from a different arena. In classroom settings, creative, different, difficult children are marginalized and labeled. Yeah. It's too difficult. Don't have a robust self-care program to support practice. Client being non-compliant. Therefore, they are not provided the personal educational resources as those within normal range of behavior. How sad is it that in an effort to control young people in classrooms who might be exhibiting difference, we end up medicating them than working with them and teaching them and offering them resources that meet their needs versus quick fixes that meet the needs of the adults who want these kids to be controlled enough so that they can be the objects that we expect them to be in classrooms. I agree, Phil. It is too kind. It's disconcerting. It's disappointing. It's anger-provoking and producing. Especially when it comes from those. Do we not inadvertently set them up for alcohol, substance, self-medication, and or self-loath soothing later? Yes, we are. I've always, I have conversations with my grandchildren, 23, 13, and 10, making an honest effort to help them to think about coping with stress before they begin to learn as they move along how the people around them are coping with stress, and not necessarily in ways that will help them to truly address the stress. If I'm not addressing the stress in a non-medicating, non-prescription way, I'm not learning how to soothe myself and to take care of myself. Big plug for teaching stress management at a young age. Forms of stigma and the impact on people's lives. Physical and social isolation, loss of relationships, gossip and verbal abuse, loss of livelihood, loss of housing, rejection by peers, loss of reputation, violence, which is the ultimate of disrespect, denial of substandard health care. The most potent, the internalized stigma. It made me not want people to know that I'd gone to Yale. The stigmas that I experienced, the isolation that I experienced in my own family, in my own neighborhood, once people learned that I had this opportunity. Learned later there was a jealousy to that opportunity, but it didn't stop the stigma and the labeling and the discrimination and the marginalization happening in my own family and in my own community, in my own world. Forms of stigma of care providers. We neglect, where clients have to wait longer, not having bedpans changed, receiving less care or attention, or denied care, denied treatment, referral to another provider or facility, senior provider push client to a junior provider push client to a senior provider, just throwing people around as if they're objects, recipients of our great care, versus the resources that can teach us how to better help and be better attuned to the true needs of people. Again, it's a part of that process of our ability to produce environments that embrace us all. Any thoughts about these forms of stigma? And have you seen them? Are they outrageous or do they fit? I know that neglect had to wait longer. Think about emergency rooms. You present yourself in an emergency room with a substance abuse issue and think about the waits that occur or lack of services that occur. Forms of stigma: denied care, denied treatment, referral to another facility, senior provider, on and on. Gossip about a person's client's issues, scolding or blaming the client. Again, scolding or blaming the client for being who they are. We re-stigmatize. We re-traumatize. We help people to feel not included. Let's acknowledge the elephant in the living room. How do we begin to do that? Acknowledging the elephant in the living room. What can we do to address stigma? Acknowledge its prevalence. Try to walk in the shoes of the person who is stigmatized. Be careful of our language. Monitor media and openly critique stigmatizing material. Respond directly to stigmatizing material with a letter to the editor. Speak up about stigma to friends, family, and colleagues. Most importantly, be aware of your own attitudes and judgments. Provide support for organizations that fight to overcome stigma. Thoughts about what we can do to address stigma. More importantly, share what you're doing to address stigma, or what you see being done to address stigma. This is the practical aspect of this work. We look at the issues and the problems in living in a humble effort to begin to develop practices that work. And if we all do this, be willing to hear the label that comes along with being an iconoclast or a rabble-riser or an alien. Oh yeah. Yeah. Oh yeah. And then again, when I raise my voice, when I make my efforts, I can become stigmatized, or I can become labeled, or I can become ostracized, within a staff entity, within an agency entity. I found a large amount of stigma language in Facebook group names for the small support. Oh my goodness, yes. Yes, yes, yes. And there's an opportunity to comment on that. I would hope it would have an impact. I hope we were not purposely making an effort to hurt. Hurt is H-U-R-T, the harmful undermining of responsibility to others. But it really speaks to, Stacy, the importance of developing a language that works, that is not stigmatizing, is not differentiating, is not labeling, is not dehumanizing. First time that word came up, but think about the dehumanizing aspect of stigma and labels. Oh yeah. Oh yeah. I was defined by my role as an alcoholic. I would say, don't expect a lot from me. I'm only a recovering alcoholic, because of the stigma and the labels that were produced when people were aware back in the 70s and 80s that that was a process I was going through. So much the importance of putting not only a face on recovery, but putting a face on the impact of stigma on recovery. I think people would care if they knew more. At least I would hope so. And the other piece of it is, what can we do to address stigma? How willing are we to do this, given the potential nature of ourselves being ostracized? We need to offer redefinitions of roles, clearly. That's why there's such a need for forward-facing coaching for family members. Yes! So we can find a way to move beyond their own shame label. And when you think about it, Blair, I know in my own experience and the work that John Bradshaw has introduced me to, so much of the shame and the labeling comes out of these families that are producing the people who are being stigmatized and labeled. I'm quiet because it so impacts me. It was my experience coming out of the family that I came out of. And again, I'm not shaming or blaming. I'm just being honest about what the experience was. And in being honest about what the experience was, it's a humble effort to do something different, to shift the paradigm, to help parents to know how their words can hurt. How successful care providers can address stigma. Put stigmatized groups at the core of care. What does that mean to you? Putting stigmatized groups at the core of care. Targeting a range of groups. Creating alliances and form new partnerships for influence and expanded reach. Fostering interaction between groups experiencing stigma and those perpetrating it. Contact strategies. Clearly that has a place in our family work. Model desirable behavior, role modeling, hold up and reward role models, employ a combination of approach while targeting a range of groups and addressing immediately actionable offenses. The best for the sickest. Do these make sense for you? How do you think about these concepts? Do you think about them? Do you think they have value? Would they be helpful in the work that you're doing? Again, our advocacy role, our removing barriers role. And don't forget the internalization of these stigmas and these labels. And the care that needs to be addressed to help people to move beyond the experiences that they've internalized, the labels they've internalized, the shame that they've internalized. Shame says there's something wrong with me, and stigmas perpetuate that shame. There is historical context for unusual alliances such as Society of Women who brought resources to the fight for workers' rights after the Triangle Shirt. Yeah, and I think there are others as well. For me, there are care alliances that we can help people in recovery, families in recovery, communities in recovery to begin to develop these alliances. For me, that's the nature. That's creating care allies who find true care in their processes. And true care is not involved or impacted through the impact of stigmas and labels. How successful care providers can address stigma: create understanding, close the intention-action gap, foster understanding and motivation for stigma reduction by creating recognition of stigma, the benefits of reducing stigma, and a safe space to reflect and gain skills for change. What do you see as being the benefits for reducing stigma? How do we begin to close the intention-action gap? More importantly, how do you close that intention-action gap? Many of us are well-intended, but do those well-intentions produce action, activities? Yeah, mindfulness, be aware, make it a priority. It's something that I'm constantly thinking about. Present moment residence. Ooh, Blair, that's such a flair for words. Well, we as a society are stronger and more creative together. We really feed each other. We need each other to feed each other, to breed each other into more caring communities and environments. I'm of the belief at this point in my career that we really struggle with the concept of how to care. So much of our care is more about control, and so much of our control is built on fear. Realize it takes time, a very precious commodity in a physical reality, clearly. So I need a commitment to the learning. I need a commitment to utilizing my time to learn and to think and to have conversations that matter, such as I think we're having here, where we can go into our world stronger. When we care, we risk. Yes. Yes. I can remember when people cared about me and I was still having a hard time not picking up a drink one day at a time. They would just constantly say, you got to take a risk. You got to take a risk. And the risk is to take care of self. And the risk is to learn how to take care of self and to have relationships that matter and relationships that are responsive to the needs of people in our worlds. Let's talk some more about closing the intention-action gap, the recognition of stigma. Any thoughts that are coming up for you at this point relative to what we've done? Let's open it wide open to what your experiences have been. What has worked for you? What do you see not working? What can you add to our understanding of overcoming, reducing, impacting stigma and shame? What do you think? What are you thinking? What's been your experience? And what is, I want to pick up on Blair's statement. What is the risk of caring in our world? What is the risk of caring? Because so much of this is about compassion, empathy, caring, treating people as resources with dignity and respect. What makes that such a risk in our world? Being hurt? May cost you money, social status, relationships. Sad but true. And if it might cost me money, social status, or relationships, I've got to be understanding of, do I care? I saw a commercial years ago in the midst of trying to turn my life over to care. And the commercial basically said that caring isn't what you do, it's what you are. It touches each instinctual hot butt point. Yeah, it brings up my own stuff many times. Gets to that middle leg of the stool of Recovery Coach Academy. You know, discovering and managing my stuff. Is my stuff fraught with labels, stigmas, because that's what's been put on me? Is my stuff fraught with fear of doing things and working perfectly with people? The power of real multi-level hearing can begin to shift the use of stigma and shaming language. Wow. Wow. A different aspect, a different activity that Stacy is helping us to hear, that our active listening can offer in shifting the use of stigma and shaming language. It is about, when I hear that language coming from someone I'm working with, carefronting that language, helping them to restate that language, an opportunity to learn differently about who I am. Again, folks, don't expect a lot from me. I'm only a recovering alcoholic. Was my mantra, was my way of putting into the world some of the pain that I felt. And that's the other piece of that. How willing are we to embrace that pain? I never confront but gently guide a new perspective. For me, that's where the concept of carefront comes from, Stacy. I like that. Gently guide a new perspective. Motivational interviewing. Listening actively, asking good questions is an opportunity for me to truly understand, but also in my efforts to understand and gently guiding a new perspective, as Stacy so eloquently describes it, I think as a way to begin to create understanding and clearly motivate reducing the stigmas that are being produced and perpetuated. Yeah, yeah. Yeah. You know, Stacy's statement, gently guiding a new perspective, really smacks of motivational interviewing for me. And Blair, your statement of, that imagery and that image for children, yeah. When I sit with my grandchildren, I actively listen and I ask good questions. I'm making an honest effort for them to think about things in a way they have not thought about them. And I think that fits in your thought, Stacy, of guiding a new perspective. It's not controlling someone's thinking. It's helping someone's thinking to be cared about and carefully explored. Gosh, this is such good stuff, folks. I so appreciate what you offer me because, I come with my own understanding of these concepts and you just broaden them so well and all of you speak so eloquently and bring your own experiences to the table. And for me, that's what collaborative learning offers. For me, that's what the ability to appreciate what this process of recovery, I sometimes coin it, we-covery, is about. We need each other to create the understanding and to close that intention action gap. And let's support each other to do that as a result of our ability to work hard to address stigma, to work hard to reduce stigma as much as we can, to work hard to raise the awareness of stigma labeling in all contexts of our living and our working. Any closing thoughts, questions, or comments on our work today? I've certainly been enriched Great. Thank you, Stacy. Any other thoughts, questions, comments on today's work, on today's experience, on today's collaborative learning experience for me? Thank you, Blair. Thanks for sharing and participating. You all have added so much to my experience of this concept. I'm certainly going to be looking forward to reconnecting with this. The pleasure's all mine, Stacy. Thank you. Thank you, Phil. You guys make it meaningful. You guys make it a pleasure. I so look forward to this time with you. Thank you so much for being here. Thank you, Tanya. Enjoy your day, folks. Be well. Lead life well.